If you're looking for Metroidvania other than the same 5 or 6 names, this might be for you. These 10 games have the exploration, the ability gating, the interconnected maps, and the mechanical satisfaction that define the genre. And most of them never got close to the attention they deserved. If you consider yourself a fan of the genre and haven't touched these, that's a problem worth fixing. Axiom Verge is one person's love letter to Super Metroid, built by Tom Happ over 5 years in his spare time, and knowing that context doesn't fully explain how complete and self-contained it feels as an experience. The alien world of Sudra has a visual language and a lore density that suggests something much larger than a solo project. And the story, which involves a scientist, a parallel dimension, and the nature of reality and simulation, is more ambitious than most games made by full studios attempt. The address disruptor is the signature tool that makes Axiom Verge specifically its own thing. A weapon that glitches enemies and environments, distorting their behavior, revealing hidden passages, transforming enemy types. It uses the aesthetics of video game corruption as a gameplay mechanic in a way that feels genuinely clever rather than just visually interesting. Finding a wall that glitches into a passage is one of the best recurring discovery moments the genre offers, and it happens consistently enough to shape the whole game. The back half becomes more dependent on the player's tolerance for dense map navigation without as many new ability unlocks as the early sections provide. Some players lose momentum in the later zones where the world opens up before the tools to interpret it fully arrive. That's a pacing issue rather than a design failure, and it doesn't diminish what the first 2/3 of the game achieve. Axiom Verge belongs in any serious conversation about what the genre is capable of when a single person builds it from genuine love. Touhou Luna Nights is the game on this list most likely to turn off players who don't already have some exposure to the Touhou series. And that's unfortunate, because the Metroidvania it builds around those characters is excellent regardless of familiarity with the source material. The time stop mechanic, which lets you freeze enemies and their projectiles while still moving freely, is one of the best traversal and combat tools the genre has produced, and the game designs its entire encounter language around it rather than treating it as one option among many. The bullet hell DNA shows up in the way enemies and bosses project patterns of projectiles that you're meant to stop, navigate through, and restart in combinations that build in complexity across the game. Freezing time doesn't make things trivially easy. You have limited duration, and managing the resource while reading patterns in frozen space is its own skill. I found myself in a rhythm of stopping, analyzing, moving, resuming that felt specific to this game and nothing else. The game is on the shorter side compared to most genre entries, and the ending arrives before the exploration quite reaches its potential. A few of the later map areas feel underutilized compared to how much work the early zones put into their layout. None of that changes how satisfying the core loop is. Touhou Luna Nights is a game that understands its own best idea and builds everything around it, which is a more disciplined approach than games with triple its runtime usually manage. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom is the spiritual successor to the Wonder Boy series, and it wears that lineage clearly without being limited by it. The transformation mechanic, where you shift between different animal forms, each with distinct abilities and physics, is the backbone of both the exploration and the combat. The game builds its entire map around what each form can and can't do, and late-game sequences that require switching between multiple forms rapidly are some of the most satisfying puzzles the genre has produced. The presentation is striking. The hand-drawn animation gives the game a visual quality that few indie Metroidvanias reach, and the character designs and world environments have a warmth and specificity that make the world feel alive rather than functional. It's the kind of game where you stop in a new area just to appreciate how it looks, which is a specific pleasure the genre often sacrifices for gameplay density. The challenge level is relatively approachable compared to some of the other entries on this list, which some players will love and others will find unsatisfying. The game is generous with its hints and doesn't require the same level of observational attention that Environmental Station Alpha or Axiom Verge demand. That accessibility is a deliberate choice rather than a missed opportunity, and it means Monster Boy reaches players the harder entries on this list never will. Environmental Station Alpha is a 2015 Metroidvania made by a single developer, Hempuli Oi, and it looks like something that crawled out of the Game Boy Color cartridge, which is either going to immediately appeal to you or do nothing at all. For the people it appeals to, it's one of the most atmospherically oppressive games in the genre. The pixel art is deliberately crude in a way that generates unease rather than nostalgia, and the sound design amplifies it into something that genuinely unsettled me in a few areas. The exploration is dense and rewards attention in ways that most games in the genre don't bother with. There are secrets layered under secrets. Rooms that look like dead ends until you've acquired a specific ability, patterns in the environment that are actually instructions you weren't told to follow, late-game content unlocked by an in-game discovery that most players stumble into rather than find deliberately. The game communicates almost entirely through the environment rather than dialogue or exposition, and that restraint makes every discovery feel earned. Boss fights are where it asks the most of you. Some of the late bosses have pattern complexity that approaches something more demanding than the genre typically offers, and I hit walls in this game that other Metroidvanias simply don't build. That difficulty will filter players, and it's worth knowing going in. But Environmental Station Alpha has an identity so specific and a sense of place so committed that it's earned its reputation among the people who found it. But most people haven't. Astalin Tears of the Earth takes the Metroidvania structure and crosses it with roguelite permadeath in a way that sounds like a compromise and plays like a feature. 3 playable characters, each with different movement capabilities, and when one dies, you're playing as the next one. Deaths are permanent within a run, but the map stays explored. Unlocked shortcuts persist, and boss items stay acquired. The game resets your characters, not your knowledge. That design choice turns death into information, not punishment. Losing to a trap you didn't see teaches you that the trap exists. Coming back through the same area with better knowledge of the layout and awareness of what killed the last character creates a loop where every failure makes the next attempt more capable. I died constantly and kept going back because each death felt like it had moved something forward rather than just ended a run. The pixel art and chiptune score are exceptional, and the world design has that quality where the map starts to feel like a place you actually know rather than a series of connected rooms. The roguelite elements mean some runs will feel harder than others based on what you're missing, which occasionally tips in a frustrating rather than challenging. The story is also more interesting than most roguelite Metroidvanias attempt, which makes the early runs that end before the narrative develops feel like they're cutting off something worth hearing. Outbuddies DX is an underwater Metroidvania with an art direction that channels the atmosphere of cosmic horror science fiction. Massive submerged structures, alien architectures that suggest a civilization long gone, and a color palette that makes the depths feel genuinely oppressive in a way that dark world design often attempts and rarely achieves. The setting alone separates it from most of the genre, and the game uses that setting to create a sense of scale and isolation that larger titles with bigger budgets don't always manage. The buddy system is the central-mechanical addition to the genre formula. An AI companion floats alongside the player, hackable into terminals and enemy systems, able to interact with the environment in ways the player character can't. Using it to solve environmental puzzles while managing your own traversal creates a coordination rhythm that felt genuinely novel when I played it. The drone hacking mechanic in particular opens enemy mech units as temporary platforms and weapons in ways that no other game on the list is doing. The controls have a stiffness that the game eventually asks you to work with rather than around. And whether you read that as deliberate design for the weight of underwater movement or just clunkiness is going to depend on your patience. Some rooms also suffer from unclear visual communication about what's interactive versus what's background. Outbuddies DX is not a polished game, but what it's doing with atmosphere and the buddy mechanic justifies its place here completely. Robbie Ribby is the hardest sell on this list from a first impression standpoint. The anime aesthetic and the bullet hell combat hybrid are filters that work against it immediately, and the people most likely to love it are often the last ones to give it a chance. Getting past that first impression reveals a Metroidvania with one of the most elaborate map structures in the genre, a progression system that gives you meaningful choices about which areas to tackle in which order, and boss fights that are genuinely among the best in both genres it's combining. The bullet hell element isn't bolted onto the Metroidvania structure. It's integrated in a way where your traversal abilities affect how you navigate boss patterns. Extra jumps change your movement options in bullet screens. Speed abilities let you exit dangerous zones faster. The two genres feel like they're describing each other rather than coexisting uncomfortably, and that integration took real design work to achieve. The game is very long, and the late game content, specifically the optional bosses and challenge rooms, requires a level of mechanical mastery that goes well beyond what most players build across a normal run. The story and character writing operate at a level of anime sincerity that won't land for everyone, and that's a fair concern. But the players who commit past the aesthetic filters tend to find a game with more generosity and more depth than its niche reputation suggests. Robbie Ribby is the definition of undersold. Blast Brigade is one of those games that announces exactly what it is from the long title and then delivers it with more craft than you'd expect. It's a comedic action Metroidvania with a rotating cast of playable characters, each with distinct movement options and weapons that change how you approach exploration. Jeff McBullet is your standard brawler. Shelly is a sniper who plays entirely differently. Dose Huntress brings grappling hook traversal. The game uses the character swap mechanic not as cosmetic variety, but as actual key unlock design. Certain areas require a specific character's toolkit to access. The comedy works, which matters more than it sounds. A lot of games try for this tone and produce something that undercuts the gameplay loop with constant winking. Blast Brigade keeps the humor in the writing and the character interactions without letting it bleed into the mechanics being taken less seriously than they should be. The villain organization is genuinely funny. The banter between characters during exploration scenes earns laughs rather than just attempting them. What holds it back slightly is the back half losing some of the tightness the opening establishes. A few of the later ability unlocks don't open as many new pathways as the early ones do, which slows the sense of momentum. The map is also dense enough that some players will spend time backtracking in areas that don't reward the revisit. Neither of those issues should keep anyone away from it. Blast Brigade is a better game than its marketing ever suggested, and it found almost no one. Yoka's Island Express is the most unusual game on this list structurally. It's a Metroidvania built almost entirely around pinball physics, and that description either makes you immediately curious or leaves you skeptical about whether it qualifies. It qualifies. The island map is fully interconnected. Ability, gating controls progression, and the act of exploring to find new areas requires understanding the map layout and your current toolkit in exactly the way the genre demands. It's just that your primary movement mechanic involves launching yourself off flippers and bumpers, rather than dashing or double jumping. The pinball mechanic is genuinely, consistently fun in a way that made exploration feel different from anything else in the genre. Chaining shots across a room to hit multiple targets, building up enough speed to reach a distant platform, discovering that a wall you've passed 15 times is actually a flipper waiting to be activated. The vocabulary of pinball maps onto exploration design in ways that Yoku makes look obvious in retrospect, even though nobody else had done it. The tone is gentle in a way that separates it from most of the genre's darker aesthetic tendencies. This is a bright, cheerful game about a dung beetle delivering mail on a tropical island. And the charm of that premise is genuine rather than precious. Players who need difficulty and tension from their exploration games will find it underwhelming. For everyone else, Yoka's Island Express is the kind of game that leaves you slightly sad when it ends because the world was too enjoyable to leave. Valdestory Abyssal City is the game on this list with the most action RPG depth. And if you came to the genre from something like Symphony of the Night rather than Super Metroid, it's probably the one that will feel most immediately at home. For playable characters with completely different combat philosophies, and the gear and skill tree system underneath those characters is deep enough to support multiple play-throughs with meaningfully different builds. The combat is demanding in ways that put it closer to an action game than most genre entries. Parrying, aerial combat, elemental affinities, status effects. These systems interact in ways that take the full game to fully understand. I found builds in the second playthrough that made the first playthrough's approach look like I'd been ignoring half the game, which is exactly the kind of discovery that makes deep systems worth the investment. The world design is where it earns its place on this list. The Abyssal City feels genuinely layered. Vertical descents that reveal how areas connect to each other. Shortcuts that collapse travel time once you understand the layout. Secrets that require revisiting zones with abilities unlocked 3 areas later. The story has religious conflict and political complexity that go further than the genre typically commits to. This launched in early access, and its release reception was quieter than it deserved, and it's been finding players slowly ever since.